So we had a lovely surprise in May, and I'm not talking about the coronation. Ian Fleming Publications surprised us all with a brand new James Bond book by Charlie Higson on His Majesty's Secret Service. I read it, I liked it, let me tell you all about it. Stay tuned. Hi guys, it's me, and I'm making a kind of an overdue video actually about On His Majesty's Secret Service, which is the brand new James Bond book from Ian Fleming Publications. And boy, have to admit, this was a delightful surprise. I had just spent a lot of time complaining about Ian Fleming Publications. I am still so angry at them for having the audacity to edit the words of Ian Fleming in these new edited versions. God, the arrogance to do that. But, gotta say, Ian Fleming Publications knocked it out of the park with this. So we were just minding our own business, doing our own thing, celebrating 70 years of Ian Fleming publishing at Casino Royale, cursing the name of Ian Fleming Publications for screwing around with the language of his books, when they announced that a brand new James Bond book was going to be published on May 4th, 2023, which at that time was about a month away. And it was like, what? Where did this come from? And it turned out that I think it was the beginning of April or end of March, the folks at Ian Fleming Publications have been sitting around and being like, oh, you know what? It's 60 years since On Her Majesty's Secret Service was first published. We ought to do something about that. And I guess they called up Charlie Higson, who wrote the Young Bond series. I mean, Charlie Higson is an incredibly accomplished writer off his own bat. He's also hilarious. He's just brilliant, Charlie Higson. He does a fantastic history podcast. He's written some great books. He's in an iconic British comedy show called The Fast Show. And yeah, he wrote the Young Bond series, which was brilliant. And they asked him, hey, do you want to write a James Bond story? He was like, all right then. And he did. He bloody well did. He wrote a James Bond story in a month. And we're not talking like a short story. We're talking a full-length novel in a month. And then the next month, they told us about it and published it in hardback for May 4th, 2023. 2 days before the coronation of King George III, and they released it worldwide. I didn't get a physical copy on May 4th, but I did get a Kindle version of it, read it in just over a day, and I was like, bloody good job, Ian Fleming Publications. I mean, this is amazing. This is amazing. You turned around a book in the space of 2 months and allowed us to get our hands on it, no matter where in the world we were. I mean, that's something, when Ian Fleming Publications was stuck working with HarperCollins, they couldn't accomplish. You know, Kim Sherwood's book, poor old Kim Sherwood, her book came out, in September, and us folks in America had to wait 6 months for it. With A Mind to Kill came out, and then we folks in America had to wait, we still haven't got the paperback version here. So it's like traditional publishing never delivered when it came to Bond. And then Ian Fleming Publications, starting out as an independent publisher, did what independent publishers do best, which is be fast and agile and versatile and creative. And they produced this book. And I was just like, wow, this is everything that we wanted from Ian Fleming Publications. I know I'm still mad at you, and I still have every reason to be mad at you, and so do all of the other Bond fans who've been criticizing you relentlessly for screwing around with Ian Fleming's books. That's bad. I want you to reverse that decision. But listen, all you folks at Ian Fleming Publications, this was brilliant. This was brilliant. Bloody good job. And so let's talk about it. I've got some notes here. I don't normally do notes when I do book reviews, but this I felt was important. So, okay. On His Majesty's Secret Service. What is it? Well, it is a James Bond novel featuring James Bond. It's not like Kim Sherwood's books in which James Bond is missing. This is like a James Bond adventure, published May 4th, 2023, 2 days before the coronation of King George III, which is because King Charles III, God, sorry, which is relevant because that's what the book is about. It's written by Charlie Higson, who, as I mentioned, incredibly accomplished author. He wrote the first books in the Young Bond series. He envisioned the Young Bond series. He put it together in a coherent way. If you haven't read the Young Bond series and you're a James Bond fan, you should. They're cracking books. I mean, when you get to my age, you don't often enjoy reading books about like kids in school as much, but I enjoyed them, and they're like really, really buttoned into the canon. They make a few creative changes that make sense. They're fantastic adventures. They got the steaminess, the sadism. It's everything you need in a James Bond adventure, just like not able to buy a pint in a pub yet. And so Charlie Higson was a great choice, a great choice. If you want to, Ian Fleming Publications had this like wardrobe of different writers they could reach out to. Charlie Higson was a great, great choice. He banged out this book. It's 156 pages, which is around 40,000 words, which is around the length of The Man with the Golden Gun. And I enjoyed The Man with the Golden Gun. I know it's not everybody's favourite book. I quite enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it for a reason that ties into why I enjoyed On His Majesty's Secret Service. Perhaps the most interesting thing about On His Majesty's Secret Service, especially compared to the most recent James Bond books by Anthony Horowitz, is the fact that it is a contemporary James Bond book. It is set not just in the modern day, but specifically in the beginning months of 2023, leading up to the coronation of King Charles III. And that's what it's all about. And that leads us on to, what is the book about? Well, the book is about King Charles III's coronation, or more specifically, an evil plot behind it. So Agent 009 has been murdered, and James Bond gets summoned into M's office to learn what he was up to. And he was investigating Athelstan of Wessex, who's kind of like a... how could you describe him? Right-wing popular figure. He lives in Hungary in this big castle, but he sees himself as like the rightful heir to the throne of England because he's descended from the Saxons of Wessex, from King Alfred himself. If you're not familiar with King Alfred, most British people are, but King Alfred was, King of Wessex. I was born in a city called Winchester, which was the capital of Wessex. And in the centre of the city, there's a statue of King Alfred. And King Alfred the Great, and he's standing there with his sword and his helmet, and he looks magnificent. But the most famous story about King Alfred is the fact that he was on the run during a battle and hid out in this lady's cottage. And she was like, "You can stay in my cottage and avoid being slaughtered, but you have to promise to take my cakes out of the oven before they burn." And she went off to do something. And he was so despondent about losing this battle that he didn't look after her cakes in the oven, and they ended up burning. And he got in big trouble with her for it. Can you imagine this little old lady yelling at the King of Wessex for burning her cakes? But that's it. So a lot of people have said the statue of King Alfred the Great in the centre of Winchester, instead of a sword and a helmet and stuff, maybe you should be holding up some burnt cakes. There we go. But so this guy, Athelstan of Wessex, fancies himself as the rightful ruler of England because he's English, not like King Charles III, who's, derived from this German stock. And James Bond has to go and investigate him. And in doing so, James Bond uncovers, it's quite a clever plot. I guess the best way to describe it without any spoilers is there is a plot to turn the coronation of King Charles III into a sort of January 6th type insurrection. If you're familiar with that, in January 6th, 2021, when they were going to confirm President Biden as President of the United States, a lot of people who supported Trump stormed Congress to try and stop that from happening. And basically the evil plot in this book is to do something similar. I'm simplifying it. It's definitely worth reading the book. I'm not giving you any spoilers. But there we go. If that's what you're looking for, there's an answer to it. And what makes that interesting as a plot point is it's not just a modern day Bond. So you're not just dealing with the fact that James Bond is 35 years old, running around in his Aston Martin. Does he drive an Aston Martin in this? No, I don't think they specify the kind of car he drives in. But he is a young, vibrant. You could imagine Daniel Craig in the role as James Bond in the modern day. And that's a tricky thing to get right. I mean, I noticed with the continuation novels, back when you had John Gardner and Raymond Benson, it was kind of believable just to continue that James Bond was, still a secret agent in active service. Then they made the very sensible idea to start writing period books. So you had Sebastian Faulks wrote a period book. William Boyd wrote Solo, which is a period book. Then you had Anthony Horowitz wrote a trilogy of period James Bond books, and those worked great. And I would have said, up to this point, that's the formula. James Bond is a 60s superhero, a 60s spy, 50s, 60s spy, so you should write stories set then. And I have changed my mind because of the skill and deftness with which Charlie Higson wrote this book. So he didn't focus really on any of James Bond's background. James Bond was like a fixed article just in this book. You know who James Bond is. You know his name. And so the book just followed his adventures. And it worked beautifully. The only thing I think that kind of threw me out a bit was when James Bond was referring to the fact that he had never grown up with the imperial system, as in like pounds and ounces and miles and stuff like that. Because I guess if you're 35 living in Britain these days, you grew up with the metric system with kilograms and stuff like that, which is kind of weird because to me, with the James Bond books, when you read them, that those are period details. It was England at the decline of the British Empire, so you had not just pounds and shillings and pence and old francs and new francs, but you also had pints and pounds and all of the old things. So it's just an interesting biographical detail which establishes that this is a Bond who was born 35 years ago rather than this is an eternally 35-year-old Bond. But when we say it's a contemporary Bond story, it's also contemporary to the modern day. The whole storyline is very much derived from the problems the world faces right now. I mean, we've got the allusions to the January 6th uprising, the insurrection in America. You've got the fact that the Athelstan of Wessex is living in Hungary, which is kind of a right-wing country with ties to Russia. There's sketchy stuff going on there. Maybe the only reason he could be there is because of that. You've got direct mention of the war in Ukraine. You've got direct mention of how social media is like radicalizing people, especially young men, which is an issue a lot of people are talking about right now. So everything about this book is very, very contemporary. And I like that because I've been so into reading the period James Bond books, I'd kind of forgotten that when Ian Fleming wrote his books, they were contemporary books and they discussed contemporary politics. When he talks about reading John F. Kennedy's Profiles of Courage on an aeroplane, that book was brand new. John F. Kennedy was still kicking around. So in some ways, moving away from having a period Bond ended up making these books almost more Fleming-ish, kind of. It's difficult to say. I love the Anthony Horowitz books, and I think they're really, really well done. But Charlie Higson did a fantastic job bringing Bond into the modern day, and it kind of showed there was a little bit of an element perhaps missing from only focusing on period Bond. It's kind of interesting to see Bond as somebody who exists in the same world as we do. And when you were reading the original James Bond books back in the 50s and 60s, you were reading about James Bond existing in the same world as you did then. So I like that. It works. I think it was a really, really good instinct to write a modern day James Bond book. And I think it was a really tricky thing for Charlie Higson to get right. But God, he got it right. He damn well got it right. So is the book any good? Well, you probably guessed that I'm quite positive about it. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It's a brilliant, fast-paced read. You start reading it and you just continue through. It is an absolute breeze. I read it in a day. I read it on Kindle because I didn't want to wait to get the hardback delivered, which I am getting hardback delivered. It should be coming in next couple of days, I think. But I had it on my phone. And so, I was cooking breakfast for the kids, reading on my phone. I was in the shower, reading on my phone. I was waiting for the kids at the bus stop, reading on my phone. I read the whole thing in a day and just whizzed through it. And it was a really enjoyable experience. And it reminded me of what it's like to read a book and enjoy it. I just love reading books because that sucks you out of your head and puts you into a different world. But it makes it so much more interesting because you're kind of like, I'm meditating in Charlie Higson's mind. I'm seeing Bond through his eyes. But I still have to conjure up all of the scenery using my own imagination. I really, really liked that. The first chapter establishes everything really, really well. So in his interview with David Zaritsky, Charlie Higson was talking about how Bond is simple. It's easy to write a Bond story because Bond goes to M tells him what the mission is. He goes off and accomplishes the mission, and then he ends up in bed with a girl for the final page. And that's exactly what the book is. And it's a formula that works really, really well. And that is exactly how Charlie Higson set it up. He set it up with, a brief intro scene to kind of tease the ending, which worked really, really well. Then you got the briefing with M. And what he did that I really, really appreciated is, I mentioned that this whole book starts off with the murder of 009. I mean, I'm not spoiling anything. That's literally in the first few pages. But Charlie Higson managed to embed an emotional hook. So even though at this point we don't even know 009's name, we care that he's dead. we actually care about it. James Bond goes off on his mission, and we're actually emotionally invested in this. And that's something Ian Fleming didn't always do. That's something that's missing from a lot of the James Bond movies. So bloody good job with that, Charlie Higson. Really good. And then, of course, you've got the adventure. And the thing I really enjoyed about On His Majesty's Secret Service is it is a really coherent story all the way through. There's a plot. The thing the bad guys do makes sense. The thing Bond does makes sense. There are a couple of really interesting twists in it, but they make sense. The best twists are the ones where something completely unexpected happens, but then when you look back, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And there are 2 twists in there, and you read them, and you're like, oh, that was unexpected. But it makes sense. And that's really satisfying. And that, again, is something that Ian Fleming didn't always manage to accomplish. I mean, Goldfinger, I love the book, and I love so much about the book, but it's got a dumb plot, which they had to fix in the movie. And so it's really enjoyable to read a book in which the plot makes sense and hangs together and is coherent and has stakes, and we're emotionally invested in it. It's very well done like that. What makes the book stand apart from other books? I mean, I mentioned I'm a big fan of Anthony Horowitz's book. You can't really compare these two. They're very, very much like different books. If I was going to compare them, actually, I'd say that On His Majesty's Secret Service reads a lot like Raymond Benson's books, and that's a compliment. I know, I think because Raymond Benson's books were written such a long time ago, back in the 90s, we kind of lumped them in maybe with Archaic Bond and Gardner's books, which were a bit goofy, but Benson is a really solid craftsman as a writer, and he did a really terrific job with his books. And reading Charlie Higson's books, it's like, yep, fast paced, got into it. It's nice and lurid where you need it to be. I really enjoyed that, and I think it kind of made it stand apart as a reading experience. Definitely made it a very different reading experience to Anthony Horowitz's book, without making it, better or worse. I think the interesting thing about it is this book reads like a first draft. You might think that's an insult, but it's not. So obviously Charlie Higson only had a month to write this book, and he did a bloody brilliant job. However, you read it and it reads like a first draft. What do I mean by that? Well, there are certain bits in it that you read and you're like, if he'd had 6 months to write this book and 3 months to get this book professionally edited, I'm sure he'd have sat down in the offices of Ian Fleming Publications, and Ian Fleming Publications would have said, maybe you want to take that bit out, maybe you want to pull this one back a bit here, maybe you don't want to go there with this book. And it seems like they've just given him free rein, and it works really, really well. I like it. It gives the book a kind of rawness and edginess to it that I particularly enjoy. I mentioned earlier The Man with the Golden Gun, which I know a lot of Bond fans don't like because Ian Fleming passed away before it was published, and he only got through to sort of revising the first chapters, and the rest of the book is kind of a little more skeletal than most James Bond books. I enjoyed that, actually. I kind of enjoyed the reading experience. It was like walking into a house that hadn't been fully built yet, and you got to see the gubbins and stuff. With Charlie Higson's book, it's like fully built out, but there are sections in there that you're like, oh, that's interesting, you would include that. My best example is there is a joke in the book that is lifted lock, stock and barrel from Austin Powers 3 Goldmember. I mean, literally the same. I mean, it's changed enough so it's not like plagiarism, but the joke is from Austin Powers 3, and it's in the book, and it remains in the book. And I'm like, I like that. I admire that. If this book had taken 6 months to write and 3 months to edit, I'm sure someone at Ian Fleming Publications would have wrung their hands together and said, oh, we can't really have that. Just like they edited the bloody words to Ian Fleming. But instead, because it was rushed through, that joke stayed in there. And I read it, and it did take me out of the story a bit, because I was like, that's a joke from Austin Powers. But also, I was like, that's a joke from Austin Powers. I'm enjoying this. And that's the whole thing. I enjoyed it. And all sorts of little things that probably would have been edited out in a second or third draft that stay in there. And they make the book better. They make it fun. They make it unexpected. And I think the one thing they add is an element that was missing, perhaps, from Anthony Horowitz's book. They always talk about James Bond as like sex, sadism and snobbery. And you know, in Anthony Horowitz's books and in this book, you got the sex and you got the sadism, but it's the snobbery that's missing. And I think when Charlie Higson wrote this, he was just in the flow state, and it was just like a stream of consciousness, and he pours out some things that seem to go off in wild tangents. Like there's a big section where James Bond is reading The New Scientist. I read The New Scientist. Always used to have The New Scientist in our house. It's quite interesting that. But he's reading an article about gut bacteria, and he's thinking about how important gut bacteria is and how it's always helped him have gut reactions to things. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, this is kind of a bit of an aside to go off. But the thing is, when you go back and read the original Ian Fleming books, he was doing that all the time. He was going off on asides to talk about random things. And that what gives the book kind of that interesting element to it. And then Charlie Higson's James Bond talks about how, you know, he doesn't wear clothes with logos on it, and other just little touches of personality, and always Charlie Higson's personality showing through. And there are certain elements where, you know, Bond is being quite opinionated about things, and not necessarily being accurately opinionated. Maybe it's just being grumpy old Englishman opinionated, or grumpy old Scotsman opinionated, but it works. It adds a certain rawness to it, and it's very much in keeping with the way Ian Fleming wrote, without being like a pastiche of it. It's just Charlie Higson just let his freak out on the page, and it worked, because his freak is the same freak as Ian Fleming's freak. So I really enjoyed those particular elements of it, and I'm pleased they weren't edited out, and I kind of like that. I knew this book was going to be good because it was written in a hurry, and the fact that these elements are in there, just they highlight Fleming-esque touches that in very polished books like Anthony Horowitz's books you don't have to the same degree. So I really enjoyed that. The other things I really enjoyed about it were the fact that there are some blatant examples of like Charlie Higson taking real life people and making fictionalized versions of them. The most obvious of that is the big bad henchman in this book, Canna Lyle, who's this South African guy. Yeah, this book continues the long-standing James Bond tradition in both book and film of being mean to South Africans, by having a South African bad guy who is very clearly based on Andrew Tate. I don't know if you know Andrew Tate. He's just this tedious Anglo-American wanker who's on social media constantly. I don't know. But yeah, Charlie Higson very clearly bases this character, Canna Lyle, on Andrew Tate. You can even the names there. In England, there's this sugar brand called Tate and Lyle. So Andrew Tate, he has Canna Lyle. So it's very clearly Andrew Tate as a bad guy, and it's really satisfying to see what ends up happening to him. But you know, it's the perfect pulling men. I enjoyed that, and Ian Fleming did that. Like Le Chiffre in Casino Royale was based off Aleister Crowley, who's this weird pseudo spiritual guy. So having a character based off Andrew Tate is a very Fleming thing to do, and I enjoyed that a lot. There are other characters in there that I think are based off real characters. I think there's a character based off Tommy Robinson. I don't know, I'm too far out of British politics because I've lived in America for 20 years, but I kind of got the impression that there were characters based on other characters. Even the bad guy, Ethelstan of Wessex, I've got a suspicion that he might kind of be based off. There was this really crazy guy in Winchester when I used to live there who fancied himself as King Arthur, and he grew a beard and he dressed in medieval things, and every time they had an election for Member of Parliament, he would stand in that election. So, you know, I think even Ethelstan of Wessex, the bad guy, was kind of based off that guy from Winchester. I don't know. I'd be really interested to know if that's the truth. I'd have to, hopefully I'll get a chance to ask Charlie Higson one day. But I enjoyed that a lot. I really enjoyed all of these contemporary elements and real life filtering their way in there. And the book also was really fun and exciting. The fight scenes were like crisp and short and effective. There was a bloody great car chase in it. I remember in his interview with David Saritsky, Charlie said that, you know, he's told the estate of Ian Fleming, hey, I'm going to be a few days late because I want to include this car chase. And I'm so glad you did, because it was really exciting. A Land Rover Defender, one of those little Polaris ATVs whizzing through the fields of Hungary. It was like fantastic. Really good stuff. And once again, the plot was just coherent. It made sense. It was satisfying when the book ended. So yeah, really, really, really enjoyable, and it made the book stand apart. Did I have any criticisms? Not really. The thing I did notice, there were a couple of typos in it. Nothing major, nothing that takes you out of the flow of things. And to be honest, nothing that a lot of traditionally published books these days aren't letting slip in there. Because, profit margins are shrinking. They're firing proofreaders. They're using ChatGPT and Grammarly and stuff to proofread books. So there are a couple of typos. That's fine. There was one bit that kind of annoyed me where um, they had a machine gun, well, a submachine gun, and he ran out of bullets in the cartridge rather than the magazine. It was just one of those things. If you're not familiar with guns, and I'm not very familiar with guns, but if you're not familiar with guns, you know that you put the cartridges in a magazine. The cartridge isn't what you put in a gun. It doesn't really matter. But I know there are going to be a few gun people who are like, huh? But to me, having a couple of typos, having kind of weird error in that's like a mark of pride, because Ian Fleming Publications is an independent publishing house. They turned out this book in 2 months. Yeah, there are a couple of typos in there. Yeah, there was that small error in terms of guns, but for what the whole package was, coherent, like altogether, I didn't care about that. I kind of liked it. It kind of added to the charm. It was like, yes, this is an independent publishing house giving us Bond fans what we want, when we want it, how we want it. So it was just an interesting observation that they were in there. The other thing is to a certain extent, there's just a few pages where James Bond is mentally going through, Ethelston of Wessex's background and his plot and his motivations and what's going on in the world. And he talks about January 6th in America and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I get it. And it all comes together and it's all okay. And I think that the thing that maybe Charlie Higson isn't aware of is here in America, you talk about the January 6th insurrection in New York. Yeah, everyone calls it an insurrection. But you go outside of New York, not even necessarily very far outside of New York, and there are people who are like, it wasn't an insurrection. It was just a peaceful protest and stuff like that. And they genuinely believe that. So I was reading this and part of me kind of felt a bit, I didn't completely think that Charlie Higson grasped all the nuances of the way of thinking that has enabled society to be messed up like this. But then again, James Bond, being British, probably wouldn't have grasped all the nuances that you do in America. So it didn't really make much of a difference. But I think maybe a couple of people might raise an eyebrow when they're reading that thing. But, however, I'd just like to clarify that a few pages on, it all sorts itself out, and especially Ethelston of Wessex, when he establishes his real motivations behind doing what he's doing. It kind of makes sense, and it kind of makes sense in the fictional setting using all of the real life things that go in there. So some people have said, oh, this is a woke book, oh, this is a left-wing book, and it's like, not really. I think Charlie Higson he's not a fan of Trump, and I don't think there are many people out there who are a fan of Trump. In America, there are a few Bond fans who are fans of Trump. I don't really have any. I think he's kind of like a grotesque man. I don't really have much feelings towards him either way. But yeah, this is a Bond who doesn't like Trump. And I think a lot of people, especially in the UK, are not going to have a problem with the Bond who doesn't like Trump. And that's it, really. God, this video's gone on for 28 minutes. I'm sorry. I enjoyed the book. I really enjoyed everything about the book. I enjoyed everything about this book existing. So there we go. That's my overall verdict. I got, look here, overall verdict. Brilliant book. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed everything about the experience of the book, hitting us like a surprise, about the build up to the book, the excitement of the book, reading the book, enjoying the book. And now hopefully I'll get a chance to discuss the book with all the other Bond fans in the Bond community, because that's what books like Anthony Horwich's book and Kim Sherwood's book and now Charlie Higson's book, that's what they give us. They give us in the Bond community something to talk about, something to sink our teeth into, something to make connections with people about. And this just delivered that perfectly. So, yeah, if you haven't got a copy of On His Majesty's Secret Service yet, correct that error. Go out and buy one. You can grab one off Amazon. You can just click the button and buy it. HarperCollins, take some bloody note of that. If you can get it on Kindle, they've already got the audiobook version of it. So there is no excuse. Go out and get yourself a copy right away and I do not think you are going to be disappointed, and I would love to know what you think about it. Let me know in the comment section down below. I am eager to hear all of your thoughts and opinions. And until then, yeah, I'll be back soon with some more videos. Stay chilled. I'm Roland Hume. I've sold 67,000 copies of my books. If you want to find out how I did it, I've got the link right here you can click. And otherwise, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more videos coming soon. Thank you.